The Anglo-Bengalee Disinterested Loan and Life Assurance Company started into existence one morning. Not an infant institution, but a grown-up company running alone at a great pace and doing business right and left, with a branch in a first floor over a tailor's at the west end of town, and main offices in a new street in the city, comprising the upper part of a spacious house, resplendent in stucco and plate glass, with wire blinds in all the windows, and Anglo-Bengalee worked into the pattern of every one of them. On the doorpost was painted again in large letters, "Offices of the Anglo-Bengalee Disinterested Loan and Life Assurance Company," and on the door was a large brass plate with the same inscription. Always kept very bright as courting inquiry, staring the city out of countenance after office hours on working days, and all day long on Sundays, and looking bolder than the bank. Anyway, there's more to this. This is the famous fraudulent life insurance company started by Montague Tigg, or Tigg Montague, who is a con man who had been a toady of one of the various Chuzzlewit nephews, Chevy Slime, and he gets some money. You find out later where that money came from. And then he partners with someone, I'm trying to remember, I think his name was David Crimple, who ran a pawn shop, which Montague Tigg, or Tigg Montague, met Crimple, and they partnered they met Martin Chuzzlewit. Young Martin Chuzzlewit was pawning stuff at Crimple's shop. Anyway, they partnered up, and when they got probably like 100 pounds, a nice little nest egg that they could put on a good show. And the small-time con man, who was just trying to grift for sixpences, shillings, and very small, less than a pound, very small bits of money, are now going for the big game. And this is, I'm just sitting here thinking, this is the first truly kind of modern financial fraud that Dickens details in his novels. We will see some other financial frauds that come later in later novels, and which have some echoes in today. The fraudulent life insurance company, though, was not that unusual, and I could say it was the fiction, but it was actually the reality of what I saw with regards to financial institutions in general for the 19th century. This is both in England and in America. And there was a big, this is why I'm pro-regulation for a lot of financial institutions. In some cases, it's not just a matter of fraud, though Dickens knew fraud pretty well. He was he was a city man, and he had a lot of businessmen and financial people as friends, and there were booms and busts. And I think part of the reason there were a lot of booms and busts was this lack of regulation. Some of the regulation, again, is to prevent against fraud, but a lot of the regulation is to prevent people who are very ambitious beyond their abilities to limit the amount of destruction they can do in general. So maybe one of these days I'll talk about systemic risk, but that gets a little too close to my day job, so probably not. In any case, what happens is Montague Tigg sets up this life insurance company, and it's basically a Ponzi scheme. And he explains this to Jonas Chuzzlewit, who is the main villain. And I never really talked about him much, but Jonas Chuzzlewit is the main villain in the book, and he's a murderer. Essentially, he ends up, spoiler alert, but you can see it coming, so it's not much of a spoiler. And as I mentioned before, this book is over 150 years old. So let's see if I can get the part I want to find with Jonas Chuzzlewit. So Jonas Chuzzlewit comes into the insurance company's offices, and he doesn't recognize Tigg Montague, and I think that's the name he's going by Mr. Montague. He doesn't recognize him, though he had seen him earlier at Pecksniff's house, at the beginning of the novel. And Montague does kind of uncover himself to Jonas Chuzzlewit to bring him in on a different level of the fraud. Both Jonas Chuzzlewit and Seth Pecksniff and some other people lose all their money when Montague Tig, or Tig Montague, is murdered. Anyway, so here we go. Montague says to Chuzzlewit, "Why don't you take premiums instead of paying them? That's what a man like you should do. Join us." Jonas stared at him in amazement. "Is that a crowded street?" asked Montague, calling his attention to the multitude without. "Very," said Jonas, only glancing at it, and immediately afterwards looking at him again. "There are printed calculations," said his companion, "which will tell you pretty nearly how many people will pass up and down that thoroughfare in the course of a day. I can tell you how many of them will come in here merely because they find this office here, knowing no more about it than they do of the pyramids. Ha ha, join us, you'll come in cheap." Jonas looked at him harder and harder. "I can tell you," said Tig in his ear, "how many of them will buy annuities, affect insurances, bring us their money in 100 shapes and ways, force it upon us, trust us as if we were the mint, yet know no more about us than you do of that crossing sweeper at the corner. Not so much. Ha ha." So what happens is Jonas came in because he wanted to insure his wife after he was having trouble with trying to get the death benefits from life insurance policies on his father. Gotta say, there was nothing really suspicious about his father's death, other than, his father was 80 years old. That's one of the complaints that Jonas had, was that, you're not supposed to live more than 70 or 70 years. It's in the Bible. You're not supposed to do that. That's very, irreligious of the old man not to have died when he was 70. Anyway, let me go down what Tig says, or Montague says, of how the scam works. Okay, so let me explain how it works. So let us say B wants a loan. So person B wants a loan. B is a little tradesman, clerk, parson, artist, author, any common thing you like. B wants a loan, say 50 or £100, perhaps more, no matter. B proposes self and 2 securities, so 2 people. 2 securities give a bond. B assures his own life for double the amount and brings 2 friends' lives also, just to patronize the office. Is that a good notion? So does he really do it? And he's like, "Do it," repeated the chairman. "B's hard up, my good fellow, and will do anything. Don't you see it's my idea?" So he's almost like a loan shark, but he's having them pay for life insurance policies that will not necessarily pay off. Okay, so here we go. It is hard upon the part of the law that it should be so confoundedly down upon us unfortunate victims, when it takes such amazing good interest for itself from all its clients. But charity begins at home, and justice begins next door. Well, the law being hard upon us, and this is about the interest they can charge on the loans, we're not exactly soft upon B. For besides charging B the regular interest, we get B's premium and B's friends' premiums, and we charge B for the bond, and whether we accept him or not, we charge B for inquiries. We keep a man at £1 a week to make them. And we charge B a trifle for the secretary, and in short, my good fellow, we stick it into B uphill and down dale and make a devilish comfortable little property out of him. Ha ha ha. I drive B, in point of fact, said Tig, pointing to the cabriolet, and a thoroughbred horse he is. Ha 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 ha. So that they say, then we grant annuities on the very lowest and most advantageous terms known in the money market. And the old ladies and gentlemen down in the country buy them. And we pay them too, perhaps. And so then they talk about how he has to deal with the cash coming in. So Jonas is no fool to a certain extent. When they come to fall in, it's all very well while the office is young, but when the policies start to die, that's what I'm thinking of. So that's what Jonas says. At the first start, my dear fellow, said Montague, to show you how correct your judgment is, we had a couple of unlucky deaths that brought us down to a grand piano. Brought you down where? cried Jonas. I give you my sacred word of honor, said Tig Montague, that I raised money on every other individual piece of property and was left alone in the world with a grand piano. And it was an upright grand, too, so that I couldn't even sit upon it. But, my dear fellow, we got over it. We granted a great many new policies that week, liberal allowance to solicitors, by the by, and got over it in no time. Whenever they should chance to fall in heavily, as you very justly observed they may, one of these days, then, he finished the sentence in so low a whisper that only one disconnected word was audible, and that imperfectly, but it sounded like bolts. So they don't have any reserves. All of the financials that they write up are fraudulent. And what Montague Tigg, or Tigg Montague, is why is he going after Jonas? Because he realizes he can scam Jonas for even more money than the small tradesman, because Jonas has cash. His father just died. He just inherited a lot of cash. And so if he can bring Jonas in, like bring in a little capital so that we can keep the, because we do need a little cash flow to keep going, to give out loans and stuff like that. But we will make all this interest back. Well, what happens is the money comes in, but it doesn't go out. It goes out to Montague Tigg, but not to Jonas Chuzzlewit. And he realizes that because that man who makes inquiries, Mr. Nadgett, that Montague Tigg keeps, well, he didn't really let Jonas in until Nadgett gives him the dirt on Jonas. And that's the point. He is basically defrauding all of the people who have shares in the company, and the policyholders, and the people who borrow money. And when Montague Tigg, or Tigg Montague, is murdered by Jonas because he's being blackmailed, David Kremple and one of the other people, that I think the guy who has the fancy uniform that's their footman or whatever, make off with the cash that is at hand before it all goes kerflooey. Anyway, I do like this one. This one's a kind of a small fraud. Only a few people are brought down with this. There is a much larger fraud that occurs in Little Dorrit. So we will get to that in due time, based off of a real financial collapse in London in the 19th century. And as I said, these booms and busts happened a lot. People, you talk about the credit crisis in 2008, and, there are things to that. But to the extent you couldn't really get that far, I really like keeping track of frauds and just financial disasters in general, because it doesn't take fraud to make a giant financial disaster. It can just be bad systems and bad decision making. This is why I feel the regulations are pretty important. In the case of this fraudulent life insurance company, why did people trust it? Well, it's because they had that brass plate. It was all the show. And that's what Montague Tigg understood, that this is how he made it work. Because David Kremple, the pawnbroker, the pawn shop guy, he wouldn't be able to pull it off like Tigg was, because Tigg was dressed all fancy. He knew how to impress and how to sucker the money people. So think of, what's her name from Theranos, and I keep forgetting her name. She knew how to put on a show, and she's not the only one with fraudulent startups and other things that if you know how to do the look, you can get people who really aren't very knowledgeable but would like to think they are. What do they know about, blood testing? What did any of them know? Anyway, that's it for Martin Chuzzlewit, and the next book, and the one for June, is going to be Dombey and Son. See ya.